Hi, I'm John, and I'm an alcoholic. Just a quick reminder, if any of you were ever curious what it would look like to end up in the shelter with a backpack full of tannerite, there's an accurate depiction out there in the glass case, and it's wearable. Um, that's why Brent was supposed to introduce me, not one of my sponsees. My sobriety date is October 31st, 2016. My home group is sober. No, it's the Fourth Dimension. And we meet Wednesday nights down in Mapleton. And to me, that's a really big deal to have a home group and service commitments within AA that keep me tied to AA. And that's a lot of what keeps me coming here and showing up. I was born in Utah. I was raised in Springville. My family, I would say, was pretty average for what a Utah family was, and I had an amazing childhood. Building tree houses, digging ditches, and making pipe bombs at 10 with my brother that was 14. That's what we did, and that's what we enjoyed to do, because my dad always had the black pipe, the neighbor has the gunpowder, and let's put two and two together, let's go blow stuff up. And we never really got any trouble. We had a lot of fun. In my teenage years, there were a new group of friends that started moving into the neighborhood, the newer houses, and they had what seemed to me a more appealing lifestyle, going camping, riding four-wheelers. But they also had this other thing they really loved to do. They liked to drink on those campouts. And they were good friends. They would let me take a strong pull off the Hawaiian Punch before they'd pour the Everclear in there, because I knew I didn't drink. And then we started doing these other things like joyriding cars at 14, robbing Pepsi trucks at 14. Doing that while they were drinking, so I was the designated sober driver at 14. And even though I was not the guy opening up the doors in the Pepsi trucks and pulling out the crates of product, I was still there for all of it. And I remember telling myself, I was like, I'm never gonna be like these guys, because I saw their life tanking. My grades were still great at school and life was still fine. And then I started watching them get into drugs and just kind of how things progressed for them, and man, it scared the life out of me. It's like that's never the situation I want to be in. And I kind of seem to be, the rolling ball. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that State Farm commercial where there's those two people that they're single and they say they're never going to get married. And then they get married and they say, oh, we're never going to have kids. And eventually they're in the suburbs driving a minivan, like the things they never wanted to be. I ended up being the person and doing all those things that I said I would never do. And I watched my friends progress, and what I thought at the time is I saw them mature. Because they were getting the girls, they were doing stuff for the girls that I didn't think you should be doing at 14. I don't know what a 14, 15-year-old needs to do with a condom. It doesn't make any sense to me. And as I started getting a little bit older, I was kind of starting to grow out of my awkwardness. For some reason, I just couldn't connect with females. I was just super weird as a teenager. And I remember this very clearly. I went in to go talk to my bishop this one time about some stuff that I had done with a girl. And I left there feeling 1,000 times worse than when I went in. And it may not have been what was said, but what I heard and what I felt is that God's love is dependent upon my righteous behavior. And so at that time when I left, I made a decision to myself, okay, it doesn't matter what I screw up next, what I do wrong next, I am never going to admit it to another human being ever. And that's what I ran with for a very, very long time. Because to me it brought more shame, it brought more pain than just holding it in. And let's be honest, it just seemed like the wisest choice at 16 years old, right? Just bottle everything inside. And what I noticed when I left there is I felt this expectation placed upon me that I was supposed to live a certain way. And there was a time early in my recovery before I'd really done step work honestly, when I was all about putting the blame on religion, people, places, and things. But as I continued to do my step work honestly, I could see that these people were not equipped to handle a person like me that was so full of ego and ignorance. Because that was really the problem. And growing up in that religion, I will say that there were a lot of expectations placed on the young men, right? You're supposed to do X, Y, and Z so you can be over here. And about the time I was graduating high school, I knew the mission was coming. I knew it was what was expected. I knew that I was supposed to go, but I was not worthy and I was not doing the things that I was supposed to. At 18, I got in a pretty bad car wreck. I was driving home late one night. I was crossing Highway 6, and I got T-boned by a guy in a dually going 70. And all I could think when I got out of that truck and I looked at it and it was just demolished, it was a perfectly restored 76 square body Chevy. And I cried because all I cared about was that truck. Didn't matter what happened to me. And the doctor at that time thought it would be a phenomenal idea to give an 18-year-old kid Oxycontins to help with his headaches. And to this point, I'd never done anything. I hadn't drank, I hadn't smoked, I hadn't done any of that stuff. And like, this is it. This is the chemical that my body has been missing all along. It's like, this is what I needed. And it helped me somewhat be social, I guess to an extent. It got to a point where I was just an angry, hateful person. But at first it worked for a little bit. The time came where the mission was to come. And I went through the motions, man. It was such a pathetic attempt. I lied all the way through the interviews. I lied to everybody. And my farewell was described by my girlfriend's mother at the time as a funeral because it was so somber. I was scared to death. And so I go in, and this kind of became a reoccurring theme. I'm in the MTC, I'm on depression medication, and I'm on heavy narcotics. And some stuff happened at home where I was very worried about my mom. And so I took my cell phone into the MTC with me, and I was letting my whole branch use it. I was calling my girlfriend every night, but it was to talk to my mom and make sure she was okay. The reoccurring theme was when they kicked me out of the MTC, they told me that I lacked integrity and that I was entitled. As an 18-year-old kid, I didn't fully understand what those things meant, so I was like, hell yeah, I am. And I kind of wore it as a badge of honor. And so I get out and I go back home. I'm living with my parents. Things just don't quite feel right with there. So I decided to move to a bachelor pad in Provo. And it was one of those houses that looked like somebody brought the motorcycle into the living room, changed the oil, but forgot to put the oil pan underneath it, kind of a place. It was amazing. Parties all the time. And I remember this one time, I was on enough of the other stuff, we'll call those the condiments that went with the alcohol, and they just enhanced it, right? That I started stealing my buddy's beer, and up to this point I was like, you don't drink alcohol, because I was taught alcohol's bad, but if it's the pharmaceuticals that the doctor gives you, like it's all good. It doesn't matter what that means. And I had taken enough of his beer. He looked at me and he's like, why don't you just go get your own? And the thought in my head is like, no, that's bad. Because if I go get my own beer, then my intention is pretty clear. I'm going to get drunk. And I remember I killed an 18-pack by myself that night. First time I'd ever drank. And I was free. I was freer than I'd ever been to that point in my life. All the fears, all the insecurities, all the worry, all the stress, they just floated away. I finally felt enough. I don't know if you guys have ever had this experience in your depressive teenage, early 20 years. Even when I was surrounded by a group of people, I felt alone. There was something missing inside of me. And as it continued to happen, my friends had all their girlfriends, and I was always like the 19th wheel, and that's fine. But the common theme was they would all come up to me and say, "Are you okay? Is there something wrong?" And there was, I just didn't know what it was. I didn't know what was missing inside of me. I didn't know how to put it into words, but it was just very uncomfortable. From the time I was 18 to 26, I was on every depression medication from Prozac to lithium. If you think that I'm pretty somber now, you should try seeing me on lithium. It's not a pretty thing. And what I didn't realize back then is I had lived so selfishly that all I thought about was me. And what I've learned in AA, if you want to live in the sunlight of the Spirit, you got to think of other people a little bit more than you think about yourself. And up to that point in my life, I had thought about only myself, and I had treated people really terribly. I only was friends with you if I could get something from you. And I didn't understand what this black cloud was. And listening to other people, listening to speaker tapes, listening to other stories, I've come to understand for myself that there is a chemical depression, and then there's a spiritual depression. And what I was experiencing was that spiritual depression, but no therapist is going to tell an 18-year-old kid that. As I kind of progressed in my alcoholism, the alcohol and the pharmaceuticals were no longer enough. I won't call it what we typically called it, but we were going up to Salt Lake to get that stuff that was really good. And I remember driving through in my mid-20s, every time I was in my truck, I would pray. I would say, "God, please let this kill me or give me some help." And from 2005, February 2005 to March of 2006, 3 DUIs, 3 possession felonies, more misdemeanors than I can count. And somehow my attorney managed to get all of these into drug court under a plea of abeyance. And so I'm thinking everything's going to be fine. All I've got to do is graduate this drug court program. And there was a recurring theme in there too. Every county subsidized a program they put me into. They kicked me out because of entitlement and lack of integrity. Without fail. The only program that I actually succeeded staying in when I was in drug court was a self-pay program because they needed my money. And they had me in their sober living up there. And I went in there with 5 months sober, so they thought. And so they would let me go see my parents on the weekends. And I would go to my buddy's house, and we would just get hammered. It was this janky little fourplex. There was a lot of dysfunctional families in that little fourplex, and so all the teenage boys liked to hang out with us. And we wouldn't let them drink, but this is kind of a story to kind of spotlight how selfish I was. There was this one kid, and he had a longboard. I think he was 13 or 14. He's like, "Hey, you know what? I will give you this longboard for a carton of cigarettes." And I'm like, done. Done. Going to the gas station, I'm getting a carton of cigarettes, and I'm getting another 20-pack or whatever it was. And so I go, and we're making this deal. And all I can think is, I want this longboard. And so as I'm in the middle of this transaction, my tweaker buddy stops in the middle of his story telling me about how he's going to marry the stripper he just met. And he's like, I don't know about you, but I don't think it's the best idea to be buying kids cigarettes. I was just like, oh my gosh, he's completely right. But I went through it anyway. Turns out the longboard was the size for a 14-year-old kid, and it could not support my 180 pounds, so we got both anyway. I somehow managed to graduate drug court. I honestly don't know how. And a week before that graduation, I met my wife. And the first time we met, I reeked of beer. I reeked of cigarettes. Clearly, it's what she was looking for. And I said, hey, you know what? There's this pretty cool thing going on next weekend. I think you should go with me. And she's like, well, what is it? I'm like, well, it's my drug court graduation. And so, for some reason, this relationship just felt different. We were doing the dumbest things. She was on my phone plan. We were putting bank accounts together. She was moving in with me. And it was complete chaos. Absolute chaos. I don't know how many times that woman moved out back to Washington where she grew up because she could not handle the lies and manipulation that I was throwing at her. And this woman is my angel. She is truly my angel. Because she's the only one that could ever see through my bullshit. She left me 2 weeks before we were supposed to get married the first time because she caught me with a needle in my arm. Family was already sending in wedding gifts from out of town. Kind of a thing. And she was gone. And of course, me being the suave that I am, I changed my lies, I changed my manipulation, she would come back. And that's when DUI number 4 happened. It was her birthday. She wanted to go to church. And I told her to get bent because I want to drink. And I got hammered. I was trying to kill myself. Woke up 3 days later in a holding cell in Orem. Pissed myself, I don't know how many times. Food trays just stacked up on the door. And you would think that would be enough to humble a person to say, maybe I have a problem, but it wasn't. We were married. We got married. I think at this point we were both together long enough that we just said, you know what else are we going to do? So we got married when I was still on probation. And it just continued. I would switch things up. I would change my lies. I would switch doctors. And it was about 7.5 years ago. She came to me and said, you're moving me and your 2 girls up to Washington. And it is your choice to go back to Utah to get some help and have a chance of seeing us again or never come back. I was broken. I remember when I got off that flight in Salt Lake, I emptied my bank account and I bought everything I could find from Salt Lake down to Payson. Because I did not think sobriety was possible for a guy like me. I had 17 years of proof that all I was going to feel in this life was pain, that I was going to feel was hurt, and I was always going to need something to drown that out. I was introduced to AA in 2006, but it didn't stick because I had that terminal uniqueness. I could not identify with the people that were there. The only guy I remember was Ray that had a real message. And I would think, nah, this guy doesn't understand. He's freaking old. Like, I'm a 23-year-old kid. And so I didn't know where to go. I was broken. Hence the sobriety date of October 31st, 2016. Because when you wake up from a failed overdose attempt, I mean, what's the next step? I didn't know where to go. The treatment center that had been trying to get me in there for 3 months, I called them because I didn't know who else to turn to. I knew if I had stayed in that empty house by myself, eventually I was going to eat a bullet. And I would never see those sweet little girls again. My family is amazing. And I had no clue what I would be missing out on back then. And so I went to treatment. It was very hard, very difficult. For the first 2 weeks I was there, I was seeing 3 of one person in front of me because I was coming off of so much stuff. And after about 10 days, I was cured, right? Fortunately, there were some people there that were a voice of reason to say, just give it another week. Just see if you can hang out another week. The best thing that place did for me was take me into AA meetings because I would see guys doing this. I would see guys sharing their story. I would see guys sharing their chaos, and then they would laugh about it, and the whole room would laugh about it. And I was like, how does that even happen, right? And I kind of wanted something of what they had, but I didn't think, I was still pretty skeptical. When I left that treatment center, I had kind of half-assed asking for a sponsor. He was my case manager in a treatment center that I was kicked out of for, once again, being entitled and having no integrity. They finally did an observed UA, which was the problem. And it was different because when I got out of treatment, I got back to work. Things got busy. Eventually, my wife and my kids came back. I worked through step 3 with him. The big book was never opened. I was given treatment packets, and maybe that's what I needed at the time because obviously I stayed sober through it. But my experience was not the AA experience. In about 11 months sober, I finally asked a guy that was on fire in AA. And he took me through the big book, and we worked through the 12 steps in a matter of about 2 months. I can't say that I had wiped everything clean when I did that step work with him, but it gave me a strong enough foothold that I was still kind of okay. You know how we say, take it or leave it. Take what you want, leave the rest. The rigorous honesty is what I was leaving here. I could not be honest to save my life. Jeanette and I had this reoccurring issue that would come up called tobacco. We made this agreement when I went to this treatment center that if she ever suspected that I might be drinking or using again, that I go get UA'd at this treatment center. The really crappy thing was they always tested for nicotine. And I always had some pretty wise answer for why I tested positive for nicotine. Oh, it was a lozenge that I found. Like this woman was even vacuuming up a little nicotine and chew pouches on the side of the bed, and she's like, "John, I'm vacuuming this shit up." And I was like, "No, that was a booger that I put under the bed the other night." Like, that was a pretty damn big booger. And, like, we had a really hard time. I could not be honest to save my life. It was one of those things where I truly believed the situation would be handled best to not disappoint this woman that loved me, so I'm just going to lie about it and hope everything goes away. At about 18 months sober, that sponsor just kind of went AWOL. He changed his profession, and it's fine. It's just what happened. But I was still going to meetings. I think I was chairing, even co-chairing Sober at Sunrise at that point for about a year. And I was still showing up. I was not doing any step work. I was definitely resting on my laurels, and I was absolutely miserable inside. Now, I had seen Brant for probably 2.5, 3 years at this point, because he would still go to the gym the mornings that I was in that treatment center, kind of like the super senior coming back to the old ball games to relive his glory days. But he hadn't talked to me at this point, and he was like, why? You know, I'm pretty cool. Why not have more friends? And I remember one day, I'm pretty sure what was coming out of my mouth, I believed I was telling all of you how great life was and how happy I was. But what he heard was something completely different. And he came up to me after the meeting, and he said this with complete sincerity and empathy. He said, you know, you sound and look like you want to kill yourself. You should probably call me. And so I did. I love that man like a brother, because he was there for me in a time when I didn't know I needed somebody. And that's what this fellowship does. My home group is the best solid group of men that I know. In all walks of my life, I can rely on them and I can count on them. And Brant, sorry, I'll just say my sponsor from this point out. My sponsor is one of those guys that can help me see another person's perspective, because I can get pretty caught up in what I need and what I want, and I can only see my side of the story. And it's not until somebody that has been in my shoes and had my same experiences says, yeah, but maybe let's take another look at this, that I'm able to drop my pride and my ego and to go home and apologize and see my part in it. I worked the steps again with Brantley. I worked the steps again, honestly. I've worked through them quite a few times with him. We kind of do a biannual or annual inventory just to see if anything's there. And we always had this kind of funny joke, maybe it's 3 years that when you see God face to face and you finally talk to him and get all the answers to life, it doesn't happen. At least that's not been my experience yet. At about 5 years sober, I started to get pretty irritable. I was getting sick of the same old meetings. I was getting sick of hearing the same old stories in these meetings. When I thought, man, there's got to be more than this. If I'm going to stick around, there's got to be more to this. And so I asked a friend to take me through the traditions and the concepts, which is not an exciting read at all. It's really not. But I wanted to know the inner workings of AA and what makes this organization function, so that I could be a part of that service, so I could serve beyond just my home group and serve beyond just myself and my community. It didn't quite exactly go how I had planned to, but it got my eye open. And about that time, our home group started getting organized. We were having business meetings. We were putting together a committee. And they were like, hey, we need a central office rep. And I was like, yep, I got it. Tired of being a supply guy. My perfectly normal, perfect Mormon wife is tired of picking up my coffee at Costco. Give me the central office rep. And I went there a few months, and some changes were being made there, and I kind of got railroaded into being the central office co-chair. That's fine. I'm pretty sure nobody knows what they're doing here anyway. And I did that for about a year, and I'm now the chair of the committee. I was kind of railroaded into that one too, but what it has done for me is it's allowed me to open myself up to be of service in different avenues of my life, and I very much appreciated that. But last year, almost to the day, I was experiencing some things at home that I just did not get sober to deal with. It was kind of a make or break moment in our marriage, and some accusations were made. And before, I completely deserved those. When I was drinking, everything was on the table and everything was an option. But AA had taught me to be a man of my word. And I was devastated. So the best ideas that I could come up with in my own head were to go to the old crack house. Go to the old crack house, get enough to get myself numb, drive out to the middle of the desert till I run out of gas, and eat a bullet. That's where my mind goes to these days. It's not, oh, I should go get a drink, this will be fun. It's like, I want out. Because when something happens, it is that heavy for me, then I need to get outside of it. The problem is, when I introduced my wife to my sponsor, I introduced my wife to my sponsor's wife. Numbers were exchanged. And I start seeing Brand's name pop up on my phone. I'm just like, damn it, this is not what I need right now. I'd already made up my mind what the best course of action was to be, and that was to eliminate myself from this. And he knew I wasn't answering. It had been about a day. I was just ignoring his phone calls and I was ignoring his texts. And then I get the DERF on me. And the DERF is a bit intimidating. I've known Scott for years, since I got sober. We don't hang outside these rooms, but I have a deep respect and love for him. I was just like, for some reason, having Scott call me, it broke me, because somebody else knew. And I answered the phone, and I just laid it out on him, and everything that was going on, telling him how my hatred was justified. He's like, well, you're probably not wrong, but how about we just think about this a little bit? And it slowed me down enough to be able to call Brant back. And Brant was able to relay a very similar situation. He said, hey, let's look at this other perspective, because this is what happened in my marriage. And this was the situation that we had. And that broke my ego, because once again, I was thinking only of myself and what I was dealing with, and not anybody else. It's very easy for me to get caught up in that moment, right? It's easy for me to get caught up in those times where I need that relief. I need the help. And I lose the focus of what my purpose is as a member of good standing in AA, that is to be of service. And so once again, I was able to go home and I was able to make those amends. I was able to do the things that I was supposed to. As far as my amends journey goes, I've had to write a lot of letters for those people that have passed. I've had to go to the mountains and I've had to read those out loud. And I've cried like a little girl reading those letters. But the freedom that comes from that is pretty amazing. Because that is the part that, one of the common questions that we always say in our line of sponsorship is, how free do you want to be? How free do you want to be? Are you willing to do the work? Are you willing to do the tough work? "75% of the guys I sponsor are guys that I grew up with. guys that I tormented, guys that I was afraid of. And now they trust me to guide them through the steps. They trust me to guide them through the big book. I don't know how that happens for a guy like me that has no business being sober, that has no business being the fun dad of the park. We were at the park today, and my kids and I like to play a little rough, and when the other kids see that, they all come running, right? Because I'm picking up the kids on the zip line and I'm throwing them down so they not just make it to the other side, but hit and then swing up and then come all the way back. And then there's usually a line of them. No, I get to be that today. I get to be the father that shows up for my kids to show them the love and attention that they were looking for. One of the other amends that to me, it's still pretty amazing. When I was in drug court and I drank, I like to be a homewrecker. That's just one of the things that I did. And there was a lot of lies that were told within this whole love triangle thing that was going on. And I was told that they were going to get divorced because of what was going on, because a private investigator was following us around, this and that, and whatever. The husband was Indian American. I can barely pronounce his first name, let alone even know what his last name is. But about 5 years sober, I was just like, man, I've got to address this. It was 14 years ago, and I've got to address this. And so I started looking online, just doing searches on names. And I found this address that was very similar to where the home was. And so I sent a vague letter saying, hey, this is Jon Park. I'm looking to make amends for some things I did to your family 14 years ago. And just left it at that. Here's my phone number. If you want to call me back, fine. And I was working in southern Utah. And on the way down to Orderville, I was listening to the speaker tape and she said true freedom is never screening your phone calls. I was like, huh, that must be nice. And I'm driving back in the middle of the night. It's probably 10 o'clock at night, and I'm right there in that Fillmore Meadow area of I-15. That's just a dead zone. And this was just when Sprint bought out T-Mobile, so it's like 1,000 times worse. And I see this dude's name pop up on my phone. I was like, oh, crap. I can't answer this, because if I answer it, it's just going to drop, and we're going to call back and drop, and we're going to call back, and this amend's going to be ruined. But then I remember that speaker tape that I listened to on the way down. True freedom is never screening your phone calls. And I was like, shit. Guess I'm going to answer it. I talked to him for 45 minutes. Solid. Not one drop call. To me, it was very evident that God is real. God is a part of my life, and God knows what I need to be okay. There have been times, so many times that I've been faced with propositions that were so appealing to me in the past. Before I got sober, we were helping build a brewery down in Utah County. That makes a lot of sense. Mormon guys helping build a brewery, one being an alcoholic Mormon. And when the brewmaster started showing up, I was making friends with him because I had plans. I had big plans. I was going to drink there for free whenever I wanted. Then I got sober. And I was back there a year into my sobriety. It was just before New Year's, and the brewmaster comes out. We were doing some maintenance on the building, changing filters and things like that. He's like, hey, we're having this big party on New Year's Eve. You want some free tickets? It's like it covers your 2-drink minimum, your door cover. It's like, how do I explain this one to Jeanette? And I was like, no, man, I'm good. I'm just going to hang out with my family that night. And he's like, well, do you want to come in for a free tasting? I just looked him straight in the eyes and I said, dude, you do not have enough beer in that place for me. He's like, well, what do you mean? Do you see all those kegs right there? I was like, I'm an alcoholic. He's like, oh, okay. I've had those moments. I take advantage of them wherever I can because I really like to make people feel awkward. To me, it's really fun. But for the life of me, I can't understand after the fact how those words came out of my mouth, because that was a really big deal to me a year into my sobriety when I was lost. But what my life looks like today is AA has taught me how to be a member of my society. AA has taught me how to serve other people, not just within a fellowship, but within my neighborhood, within my religion. And to do it without judgment. I mean, because that's one of those things I was taught and I really love doing, is just judging the way people did things. And I would think in my head, you're doing it completely wrong. I'm not going to tell you how to do it right, but you're doing it wrong. And I would do it better. And it helped me let down to my guard to serve with open arms and with love for these people. I say this a lot whenever I share in a meeting that AA did not change what I believe God to be, the way I understand Him. And what I know today is God is all loving, despite my mistakes, despite your mistakes. And it is because of my relationship with God that I am sober today. And what we do is pretty simple, right? We've got to have that moment where we are broken. We've got to find that gift of desperation, a willingness to try anything to stay sober, and walk our way into a meeting, then have the courage to ask somebody to be our sponsor and follow that sponsor's suggestions, to work the steps. And then once you work the steps, you take somebody else through the steps, and you're going to suck at it. That's why you have a sponsor that you keep talking to. But for me, it's the pretty simple things that keep me sober, that keep me in the rooms. I do my dailies. I try to connect with God each day. I read and I pray, and then I listen. Because how can I have a connection with somebody if all I'm doing is talking or not talking? If I don't listen back for some of that advice, that's not a connection. That's a wish list. And that's usually what it comes out to be for me. And then I try to be of service. Whether that's in my home, whether that's in my home group, whether that's in my community, or a guy I see on the streets. When I was newly sober, my sponsor had to simplify this for me. What is God's will for me in step 3? I had no idea what that looked like. What the hell am I supposed to do? He's like, well, let's simplify this for you. How about you start making that bed 3 times a week so your wife doesn't have to do it all the time? I was like, okay, I can do that. Next time you're walking through the parking lot at Walmart, if you see some trash, pick it up. Like the next day, I was walking through the parking lot and I saw some trash. Of course, I cussed my sponsor's name, but I picked it up and I threw it away. Do the next right thing. That is God's will for you. And that's how I have to simplify it for me. Thank you for your love and for your attention. Thank you for not being in a treatment center, because that venue is a little bit rougher, because it's like their 19th meeting of the day and nobody wants to be there. You guys have been a little bit more receptive. Thank you for this opportunity, and I'd like to acknowledge my beautiful wife, Jeanette. She is not one of us, so make her feel welcome and then very awkward. that'll take another 24. Thank you.